So I'm Ludwig Fischer again, talking about Monte Verita from a larger historical, social, psychological perspective. And I ended the last section of this presentation talking about Goethe, the ecologist, in 1832. And I do want to come back one more time to Goethe, who wrote in 1828, quote, "The chief thing is to have a soul that loves the truth and harbors it where it finds it. And another thing, the truth requires constant repetition, because error is being preached about us all the time, and not only by isolated individuals, but by the masses. In newspapers and encyclopedias, in schools, universities, everywhere, error rides high and basks in the consciousness of having the majority on its side." Yeah, almost 200 years ago. We have much to learn from those people who gathered at Monte Verita. And we are again in times of where a very specific kind of progress is advocated very loudly. But it is time not only to become skeptical or critical, because I think this is another absolutely essential lesson to learn from Monte Verita. It is time to act in an individual way and in groups, or also to find places where people that have similar views are gathering in order to celebrate, because there was actually a lot of joy. Yes, there were rivalry, and there were people that were, advocating different views, but overall I would say in one book, Stephanie Vogel actually talks about the sexual revolution. So these people had quite a celebration of free love long before actually that word became sort of popular in the 1960s. So let us drop unnecessary restrictions, artificial norms, repressive conventions, reject the status quo, but not to retreat into resignation and depression. But let's celebrate their life that we know some before us have been able to celebrate by living a life closer to nature, a life more closer to spirit. There are some literary works and just a few movies I want to mention here to show sort of what Germany looked like in their strange rigid beliefs and in a authoritarian society as it worked during the Wilhelminian Age. Karl Zuckmayer wrote a work called The Captain of Köpenick. If you want to watch that film, it's a lot of fun. It's a comedy with a kind of a sad aspect to it. Heinrich Mann, the brother of Thomas Mann, he wrote a novel by the name of Professor Unrat. Has a play on word here. Rat, R-A-T, is actually an advisor, but Unrat is a word for garbage. And this, you might not have heard of that novel, but I would sure some of you have seen the film The Blue Angel with Marlene Dietrich. And it sort of makes fun of that, one of those German weaknesses of that people are having authorities and are oppressing people who are dependent upon them. And then, of course, in this case, it's young students, how they rebel, and how they take revenge. So, I also would like you to tell you about what the poet Rainer Maria Rilke, because you're very close to where he lived towards the end of his life, in Raron, R-A-R-O. It's in the upper valley of the Rhone. Maybe some of you, or maybe all of you, can make a stop there, sort of on your way to Zurich. And what he writes in 1903, again at that time, having the Lebensreformers in mind. Rilke says, they will live on. They will increase, no longer pawns in time. They will grow like the secret wild berries the forest ripens as its treasure. They will outlast the pomp and power of lawmakers whose meaning will crumble. When all else is exhausted and bled of purpose, they will lift their hands that have survived. So not all of the Monteveritanos survived. So I have a little visitor here, which is actually on a picture that I have for the program that was given out. And his name is Elvis. And he is an 11-year-old Havanese little dog. And there's something he doesn't like at the moment. Well, the people at Monteverita, they were much closer to their animals, making maybe a little bit of an artificial connection here. I'm skipping a few pages here, not to keeping yourself more than these 2 hours that I think was given to me. There are some very profound critics that see what we're doing right now, especially with our infatuation with technology, I would like to encourage you to read the works of Jeremy Nadler, the Oxford philosopher, especially his book, In the Shadow of the Machine. Or, in a way, when we talk about agriculture and living a natural life, feeding ourselves, Paul Hawken is a major thinker. His book, Regeneration, I think I do want to mention here. I would like to also mention Jim Garrison and Ubiquity University that has a program, Humanity Rising. I did a number of programs for them. That's an online university. So there are resources and there are deep roots. And it is possible that somebody today living somewhere in a big city feels like an outsider, like being weird. And I think it is very important to connect. And you might think that what I'm talking here about is in contradiction to what I'm doing because I'm speaking online. But no, I'm not quite a full Luddite, but it is extremely important to balance whatever time we spend with the screen, receive from a screen, with actual, real interaction with nature, other people, with animals. Actually, this little Havanese dog, maybe almost like Eckhart Tolle talks about, his biggest teacher is his cat. And I certainly am learning a lot from that wisdom that is within this little dog, this little Havanese, whose name is Elvis. And I will look for a moment, but he has calmed down. So, Jeffrey Krippel's book on Esalen, as well as Walter Truett Anderson, The Upstart Spring. Again, Paul Hawken's book on the magic of Findhorn. I spent some time there many years ago. So those are ways to overcome what I call actually electronic isolation very often. And I do want to mention one more person about whom I actually wanted to give a whole presentation, and that is Arnold Ehret, the fasting prophet, 1862 to 1922. He was a philosopher and nutritionist, and you might not have heard of Arnold Ehret, but there was a very famous Eretist who lived according to the mucusless diet, and that was Stephen Jobs. His biographer Walter Erickson reports that Stephen Jobs had read Rational Fasting and a mucusless diet and followed that diet religiously. And maybe some people say that his various serious illness that he had, his pancreatic cancer, at the age of 48, it maybe survived an extra 8 years until he died at age 56, following that Ehret way of eating and fasting. Ehret had his own clinic, and that's why I'm mentioning here, which was called Dietetische Kurpension. In 1912 in Lugano, Massagno, Villa Lucia via Cantonale. Look it up. It's within walking distance to where you are. And he had a huge influence on the American natural life movement. When he moved to Los Angeles in the 1910s, where he died in an accident, he was diagnosed with a serious disease, Bright's disease, a kidney disease, pronounced incurable. He went on a diet of fruit and fasting, and also on water for a long time, healed himself. The famous agriculturalist Luther Burbank wrote, "I have no doubt that Professor Ehret has found the fundamental cause of all disease." I did translate some of his work into English in a book called, in German, Kranke Menschen, in the English version, The Cause and Cure of Human Illness. And it just shows that what very often we could call new, the latest, like the raw food movement, that captured the imagination and changed the diet of a lot of people. And there was a raw food movement in Southern California in 1912. There was John and Vera Richter. They had a restaurant in Los Angeles called the Eutrophium. There was Eden Abbey's in Palm Springs. There were the 7 California Nature Boys in Topanga Canyon. Gypsy Boots, the hippies then, of course, and their Volkswagen microbus. That whole vegetarian and vegan movement. So, in a way, they're all sons and daughters, grandsons and granddaughters of Monte Verita. So, also, I found an article by Arnold Ehret in 1910 talking about the madness of vaccination. There were people who opposed vaccinations 120 years ago. So there were different ways, and I think the most important thing is that we look first with a discerning mind at what did people not only believe, but what did they practice? And what were the conventional views and what were the dismissed views? Just like the dwarf in fairy tales. I did a program for Ubiquity Universities on Hesse's fairy tales. Some beautifully read by Donovan, the folk singer. But that's where the power is very often. That's where the solutions are often buried, suppressed. The solutions that a certain specific society at a specific time, when it is in crisis and it leaps forward into what it assumes are its obvious and mandatory solutions, when the real shift can only occur if that which has been dismissed, denied, and persecuted can be honored again. Because that may be the deepest roots that we have in the mountain of truth. With that, I leave you. Bye-bye.